Imagine waking up already tired, not just physically, but somewhere deeper. A kind of heaviness behind your ribs, a quiet resistance to movement, to thought, to being. You scroll, you reply, you do what you're supposed to, but behind every action, there's a question whispering at the edges. What's the point? You don't feel broken, you just feel worn out, not from effort, but from existence itself. This is the kind of fatigue that Arthur Schopenhauer understood intimately. Not the tiredness of the body, but of the soul. Not the kind that sleep can fix, but the kind that silence reveals. He called it a consequence of the will to live, a force he believed sits at the very core of all existence. But here's the paradox: that will doesn't bring peace, it brings striving, longing, endless craving. For Schopenhauer, life is not a story of joy interrupted by struggle. Life is struggle, because at the center of everything, from the smallest cell to the human mind, is a blind, relentless force that wants and wants and wants. You've felt it. The hunger for more, more love, more status, more time, more meaning. But here's the problem: even when you get what you want, it doesn't last. Satisfaction fades. Desire or EGENE or ADES. And so you begin again, chasing, acquiring, hoping until the cycle repeats. And you start to feel it. That's strange, silent exhaustion, not from failure, but from the infinite repetition of desire. Schopenhauer called this the wheel of willing, a cycle that never ends because the will never rests. And the more you obey it, the more tired you become. Think about it. How many things have you pursued that, once reached, felt hollow? How many dreams turned to dust the moment they became real? How many times have you felt that this time it will finally be enough, and it wasn't? That disappointment isn't weakness. It's the echo of Schopenhauer's insight. All striving springs from lack, from deficiency, and thus from suffering. In other words, your exhaustion is not a bug. It's a feature of being human. And if you feel tired of life, it doesn't mean you're broken. It might mean you're awake. Awake to a truth most people spend their lives avoiding. You were told that happiness is the goal, that fulfillment is a destination. But Schopenhauer would ask, what if happiness is just the pause between cravings? What if fulfillment is the rare moment when the will goes quiet, not because it is satisfied, but because it is stunned into stillness? This is why pleasure is so fleeting, why peace feels so fragile. Because behind them waits the will, ready to pull you back into the cycle. But this isn't hopeless. Schopenhauer wasn't a nihilist. He didn't say give up. He said, see clearly. And what you'll see, if you dare, is that life isn't exhausting because you're doing it wrong. Life is exhausting because your unconscious will is always doing something, pulling, pushing, grasping, and your conscious mind is just trying to keep up. In the next part, we'll explore how this hidden force, the will to live, shapes your emotions, your identity, your silent suffering, and more importantly, how recognizing it might be the first step toward real inner freedom. Because once you understand the source of your exhaustion, you can stop fighting the wrong enemy and finally begin to rest. Not by doing less, but by wanting less. You are not tired because you've done too much. You are tired because your inner world has never stopped moving. Most people think exhaustion is about action, but Schopenhauer believed it's about will. And will is not conscious. It's the thing beneath every choice, the invisible tension pulling the strings behind the scenes. You want love, so you act kind. You want validation, so you achieve. You want meaning, so you search. But in all this doing, something begins to decay. Because when your life is driven by unconscious will, you don't act, you react. You don't live, you chase, and the chasing wears you down. Schopenhauer saw this hidden structure beneath existence, a world not governed by reason, but by blind impulse. The will to live is a noble. It doesn't care if you're happy. It only wants one thing, to persist. And so it uses you, your mind, your body, your dreams to keep itself alive. This might sound bleak, but what if it's just honest? Think of your own experience. Have you ever reached a long-sought goal, only to feel empty days later? Have you ever wondered why peace feels boring, while chaos feels strangely familiar? Have you ever sabotaged a moment of calm because something inside you needed drama? That's not personality. That's programming. That's the will, operating beneath awareness. Schopenhauer single quotes as insight was radical. You are not as free as you think. You are a puppet, moved by strings you cannot see. But here's where it gets interesting. He didn't say, give up. He said, wake up, because the moment you see the will, see how it manipulates your wants, how it disguises itself as meaning. You gain something rare, distance. That distance is the beginning of freedom. Instead of being dragged by every craving, you pause, you notice, you ask, is this my desire or a reflex? Do I really want this, or do I want to stop wanting? And in that question, a new possibility emerges: relief, relief from chasing, relief from proving, relief from being at war with your own life. This is not detachment in the cold, spiritual sense. It's realism. Is saying, maybe I don't need more, maybe I need less noise inside. Because the will to live doesn't only push you to survive, it pushes you to suffer unnecessarily. It tells you, you need more. You are not enough yet. If you stop striving, you'll disappear. But what if that voice is lying? What if stillness isn't failure, but liberation? Schopenhauer was clear. You can't eliminate the will, but you can begin to loosen its grip. And in doing so, create space. Space for clarity, for calm, for a life that doesn't feel like a race you didn't choose. In the next part, we'll explore how Schopenhauer saw art, beauty, and even compassion as temporary escapes from the tyranny of the will. Moments where you are no longer craving, but simply being, and in those moments, you might just remember what it feels like to be human before the world taught you to chase endlessly. There are moments when everything goes quiet. You're listening to music and forget what time it is. You're watching the sun move across the wall. You're looking into the eyes of someone you love, and there's nothing to fix, nothing to prove, just stillness. These moments don't last, but when they come, something inside you exhales, like it remembers what it's like to simply exist, without effort, without craving, without needing anything else. Arthur Schopenhauer believed these moments are not accidents, they are clues, because even in a world ruled by the will, even in a life shaped by endless striving, there are cracks in the machinery. And through those cracks, something else can shine through. Art was one of those cracks. To Schopenhauer, art wasn't decoration, it was escape, a temporary silence where the will stops screaming and something deeper begins to speak. Think of a time when a painting stopped you, or a piece of music made you forget your name, or a film cracked something open in your chest that you didn't even know was there. In that moment, you weren't wanting anything, you weren't chasing, you weren't trying to become, you were simply present. And that presence, Schopenhauer believed, is the closest thing to real freedom we have. Because in beauty, the will pauses. It doesn't die, but it lets go. And in that letting go, we remember we are underneath all the wanting. This is why some of the most exhausted people in the world turn to music, or stories, or painting, or nature. Not to escape life, but to escape the will's version of life, a life measured in goals, metrics, validation, status. And for a moment, we step outside that cage. But there's more. Schopenhauer also believed that compassion, real, unfiltered compassion, can momentarily free us from the will. When you truly feel the suffering of another, not as an idea, but as a visceral truth, the walls between you and them dissolve. And for that brief moment, your personal will, your desires, your hungers fall silent. What remains is something raw. Human, shared. And in that space, you don't need to strive. You don't need to compete. You simply understand. And in understanding, you rest. This is not sentimentality. It's metaphysical. Because the will wants one thing, self-preservation. But compassion interrupts that script. It forces you to see beyond your own story, to remember that everyone is suffering, invisible battles behind polished faces. And the moment you remember that, you stop performing, you soften. You become real. So what does this mean? It means your exhaustion isn't cured by doing nothing. It's cured, slowly, by moments of non-willing, moments where you are not a worker, or a brand, or a goal machine, but a human being, awake and aware in the present. These moments don't erase the will, but they offer you contrast, a taste of another way, and sometimes that taste is enough to shift something deep inside. You start choosing differently, not because you should, but because the old cycle starts to lose its grip. You realize not every desire deserves your attention, not every goal is sacred. Not every hunger is worth feeding, and maybe the most radical thing you can do is not to want more, but to want less. In the final part, but look at what comes next. If we cannot kill the will, how do we live alongside it? How do we honor life without becoming enslaved to it? And how, in a world of noise, speed, and endless striving, can we reclaim the ancient, forgotten gift of inner quiet, because that quiet is not emptiness. It's peace. Imagine, for a moment, that nothing outside of you changes. Your job is the same. Your responsibilities stay. The noise of the world still hums in the background, but something shifts inside. The endless chase slows. The compulsion to prove softens. The cravings lose their urgency. And in that pause, you feel something unfamiliar. You're still here, not because you've achieved more, not because you've finally solved everything, but because, for the first time in a long time, you are not fighting yourself. Author Schopenhauer believed that true peace is not found by erasing desire. That's impossible. But we can learn to stop mistaking every desire for truth. We can learn to disobey the will. And that disobedience is a form of wisdom. It begins when you realize that the will is not you. It lives through you. Yes, but it is not your essence. You are not the hunger. You are not the striving. You are not the constant grasping for more. You are the one who sees all of it. And that awareness, that quiet, observing presence, is the foundation of inner freedom. Most people think freedom is doing whatever you want, but Schopenhauer saw the trap in that, because when your wants are unconscious, you're just a servant to forces you don't understand. Real freedom is wanting consciously, choosing which desires to honor and which to let pass like clouds. So how do we live in a world built on performance, competition, and ambition? Without becoming consumed by it, we begin by redefining success, not as acquisition, not as achievement, but as alignment. When your outer actions match your inner clarity, something stabilizes. You stop leaking energy into proving, pretending, or pushing what doesn't belong. You begin to live on your terms, not in rebellion, but in quiet integrity. This isn't about giving up your goals. It's about questioning where they come from. You ask, is this goal rooted in fear? Does this desire come from love or lack? Will this pursuit nourish me or exhaust me further? These aren't easy questions. They require courage, because they might lead you to change, not your life, but your relationship to it. And in that shift, something opens. You start to find moments of real rest, even in movement. You learn how to act without grasping. How to care without clinging, how to strive without forgetting who you are. And then there's room for something deeper to grow. Call it stillness, call it presence, call it peace. Not the kind you chase, but the kind you return to. Because underneath all the layers, beneath the will, beneath the noise, beneath the chase, there is a part of you that has never been tired. Never been afraid, never been lost. That part has been watching quietly, waiting for the moment when you would finally stop running. Not from the world, but from yourself. Because rest isn't only about sleeping. It's about trusting that you don't have to earn your existence. It's about letting go of the story that says, if I stop, I'll fall behind. Or worse, if I stop, I'll disappear. But what if stopping is the only way to finally appear, fully, truthfully? And in that stillness, you may realize you're not tired of life. You're tired of the version of life that never let you rest. And now, you finally can.